It's better to win the lottery than break your neck, but not by as much as you'd think. That quote comes from The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, and that's what we're gonna talk about today, because this quote right here is the exact reason why I think so much of this conversation around happiness, it's just all pure nonsense, and we need to change everything we know about what happiness is and how we approach it, and should we even be talking about happiness ever again. Hint, we don't chase happiness. In this book breakdown, I'm going to share some of my favorite quotes, then we're gonna dive into the nitty-gritty. Then I'm going to share the rating of the book and who should read it, and most importantly, my contrarian takes and the things that I didn't like about this book and the idea of happiness overall. And then finally, I'll leave you with actionable takeaways that you can apply to your life right now and start using to change your life. Let's get started. Here are the top 3 quotes of the book. What we are today comes from our thoughts of yesterday, and our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. Our life is the creation of our mind, and that comes from the Buddha. And here is the second quote. Happiness is not something that you can find, acquire, or achieve directly. You have to get the conditions right, and then wait. This is the thesis of the entire book. You have to treat happiness like a garden. You plant the seeds, you water it, you try to get some sunshine, and then you just simply wait. Here is the third quote. Eudaimonia, or happiness, is an activity of soul in conformity with excellence or virtue. And that comes from my man Aristotle. The ancients were smart as fuck. They had it right the whole time. And somewhere in the last 50, 60 years, we went off the rails and started chasing happiness like it was a thing that we were supposed to chase. This is you. This is a giant 6-ton elephant. This is you trying to steer that elephant, and it's not working. So he calls it the rider and the elephant. It's a good analogy for understanding life and happiness and trying to get yourself to do things that you don't want to do. Mark Manson calls this the thinking brain and the feeling brain. In the book, Haidt explains that the elephant speaks in emotions, and the main emotions are like and dislike and approach and withdraw. And the elephant's job is to keep you alive. It's not a bad elephant, it's a good elephant. It wants to keep you alive, it wants to keep you safe, it wants to keep you comfortable. That's its job. But you can see more and you're like, oh, I want something better. I want a better body. I want 6-pack abs. I want to be healthy and live longer. Oh, I want to talk to that attractive person over there. But the elephant isn't looking at that, he's just looking at what's easy, safe, and comfortable. That's what it wants. That's all it's looking at, whatever this is. This should be an elephant phone right there. The best way to get the elephant to listen is with training, and it takes time. This is why changing your habits takes so long. And one of the things that the rider is so good at, and he can get too good at this, and that is rationalizing what the elephant does. So when the elephant just goes and scrolls for an hour on the phone, the rider will just be like, yeah, well, he deserved that. That's why he did it. Or he was really hungry, so that's why he did it. So the rider gets really good at starting to rationalize the elephant's behavior, which can be quite harmful in the long run. Welcome to the happiness formula. And this comes from Sonja Lyubomirsky and Martin Seligman and the happiness team. And they came up with this formula that basically says H equals S plus C plus V. You might be like, Scott, what does that mean? Let's get into it. Happiness equals your set point. This might sound like really bad news at first, but researchers predict that about 50% of your baseline happiness is determined by your genetics. So whether you're a pessimist or an optimist, or you're generally happy or in a good mood, most of the time it's 50%. Now the next one is conditions, and this is how much money do you have, whether you're married or whether you're single, where do you live, and most of us spend about 80 to 90% of our time trying to get the conditions right. But this is where the big argument comes in, where will money buy happiness? And fuck yes, absolutely it will. I cannot stand that argument when people are like, oh, it will make you happy. Fuck that, that's so dumb. Will it make you happy? Of course it will. Most of us focus on all of our energy onto getting the conditions right. And this is his argument, saying that even if you are disabled, you can still be very happy, which is so true. But I think when you compare it to whether you win the lottery versus whether you're disabled and break your neck, this is where we start to get into some problems, and it starts to shine the light on what the problem is. The problem is happiness. The next one is voluntary activities. And in the book, he just explains this as being the daily choices that you make on a simple Tuesday. Are you calling friends? Are you hanging out with people? This is another one that becomes a huge predictor of happiness, and this is connection. And this is always referenced. It's the Harvard Grant study, and it was this longitudinal study done over 80, it should be about 80 to 90 years now, and it's still ongoing. Basically, the one word that came out of the study was your happiness is determined by love, the quality of your relationships. So if you take anything from this video, it would be this. The quality of your happiness is dependent on the quality of your relationships. That's it. That is the most important thing. So this also leads me into another thing he talks about in the book, which I actually liked because he talks about work and he calls it a calling. Now, some people think that they're searching for their calling or they're looking for their passion or their purpose, but this book isn't really about that, nor am I going to talk about that now because I have a lot to say about that. But really, it's about, do you love what you're doing with the 8-10 hours every day that you're working? Do you enjoy it? Really, do you feel like you're making progress towards something? And he introduces something called the progress principle, where basically we are only happy when we're making progress toward a goal. He introduces Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the author of Flow. I'm sure you've heard of Flow, but there's also another one called Vital Engagement. And he quotes it like this: a relationship to the world that is characterized by both experiences of flow, enjoyed absorption, and by meaning, subjective significance. And nobody ever talks about this. We always hear people talking about flow. But the truth is, I think that's far superior. Vital engagement. It's a mixture of flow and meaning. Mixing those two, that's where the magic happens. And he has this quote from Shakespeare that says, "Joy's soul lies in the doing." How simple is that? Thanks, Shakespeare. The 3 pillars of happiness: love and the relationships that you have. And then the third one would be connection to something bigger than yourself, something meaningful, something outside yourself, something that contributes to the world and humanity. This was one of the most surprising parts of the book, and it's what he calls post-traumatic growth. Now, none of us want trauma, none of us want horrible things to happen, or loss, or pain, or suffering. However, it's life, it's going to happen. Now, we hear often that adversity means growth, like you gotta grind it out, you gotta figure it out, you gotta grow through the suffering, and you're gonna grow from it. Not so fast. There's more to it than that, especially when it comes to traumatic experiences. And it's one of the things that he calls deliberate versus intrusive rumination. So intrusive rumination, we all know what that is. Thoughts just come up and we just kind of spiral. We latch onto those thoughts and they just take us to usually a dark place or where we don't want to go. But the key here is deliberate rumination, deliberate processing, deliberate thinking. And there was a guy named Jamie Pennebaker. He showed that when people actually write out their traumatic experiences, they grow from them. And this also comes up in Daniel Gilbert's incredible book, Stumbling on Happiness, where he talks about how we can process trauma through a psychological immune system, that our mind is wired to basically come back to psychological baseline even after suffering. But in this book, The Happiness Hypothesis, stay here, Scott, Pennebaker came up with a really interesting finding that I found absolutely fascinating. And one of the things was venting. We all hear about like venting, just get it out. It's supposed to be good for you. Not, it's horrible. The key is sense making, or making sense of what happened. The key finding was that the people who took longer to actually take the time to process it, the best sense making and that were able to actually grow from the traumatic experience were those that processed it over the 4 days. I think this is incredibly helpful to just keep this in your tool belt as something that you know, right? Because often we hear about if you have a traumatic experience, just write about it, journal it out, get it all out. But no, It's not about that. It's about doing it over a time period. Again, it could be 3 or 4 days. The study was over 4 days, so that's something to keep in mind. Here's one of the main takeaways from the happiness hypothesis, and that's chasing happiness is unhappiness. You might be like, what? If I chase happiness, how can I be unhappy? And this comes from many different places. It started with Alan Watts calling it the backwards law. Like basically, the more you pursue something, the more it eludes you. Mark Manson also popularized this by saying, the pursuit of a positive experience is actually a negative experience. And that's what this means right here. If you chase happiness, by definition, it means that you are unhappy. So don't chase happiness. And it also comes from Viktor Frankl's amazing book, a must-read, Man's Search for Meaning. And he says, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you are going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself, or as the byproduct of one's surrender to a person other than oneself. Happiness must happen, and the same holds for success. You have to let it happen by not caring about it. Success will follow you precisely because you had forgotten to think about it. And I absolutely love this. When you stop thinking about happiness, that's when happiness finds you. And if you like this book summary and you want to check out more, I have an incredibly thorough book vault of 200 book summaries that I'm releasing, and you can check that out. If you want full access, that will be on sale. You can check a link in the description. A major through line in the book was that the ancients were smart as fuck. They basically knew it all, and we just lost our way along the way. Here are the 6 core virtues that were found from some of the greatest books ever written, a lot of the holy books, and it's wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. So here's the rating of the book. I gave it a 4 stars, very good. It was published in 2006, so at the time, it was actually quite meaningful. But 20 years later, we should all know now that happiness is not the aim. And there are some really, really good parts in the book. It's a really good mix of psychology and ancient wisdom. Who should read it? If you're really into happiness and you want the real perspective of what happiness is and not that other chase happiness, positive psychology BS, this is a good book to still read. It's very wise. It has tons of great references to some of the ancients, from Confucius to Buddhism to the holy texts, and it's a lot to process, but it's worth still reading today. It might even just be worth it just to get the idea of the rider and the elephant. If this video didn't help solidify it for you, or you want to go check it and read it in the book, that would be worth it, because the rider and the elephant is actually quite useful. Like I said, Mark Manson came up with the consciousness car idea that was taken from Freud, but he turned it into like a clown car. So it's just these analogies that help you see how our brain works, and that we're not always driving through thought and logic, that we're really driving through our emotions. So we need to figure out what those emotions mean so we can start guiding the elephant in the right direction. Now here's the real deal. These are my contrarian takes, the things that I didn't like about the book. The book could have been cut down by about 50%. A lot of it was completely unnecessary. I wouldn't say it could be just a blog post, because it really did have a lot of good information, but it could have definitely been shortened. Now, the first one is, what if his focus on happiness is entirely wrong? And this is my big argument, is that fuck happiness. It's over. Just opt out of happiness entirely. Stop trying to chase it. Imagine yourself as a surfer, and you're paddling out and you're just kind of waiting for a wave, and you might catch one every now and again, or you might see another surfer catch an amazing gnarly wave, and they just ride it out, and that's their happiness, and you're like, oh, I want that, and then you paddle over there and try to catch waves, but you never catch any, and then you finally catch a wave, and that's your happiness, and you're on it, and then whoosh, done. You're out. And then you gotta paddle out and do the hard work and do it all over again. And here's where I get really, really frustrated. He uses a study that was done on prostitutes in Calcutta that were living in the slums. And he comes to the conclusion that these prostitutes that had to give their lives and sell their body for money were just as satisfied or more satisfied than they were not satisfied. Are you kidding me? It's unacceptable to use research like that and come to the conclusion that, hey, maybe they are more happy internally than they are externally. So we look at their situation and we're like, oh, that's horrible, but we don't know them. Maybe it's not so horrible. No, that means that the problem is the measurement that we're using. If we're using that kind of measurement and someone in that situation in the slums in Calcutta as a prostitute, and we're like, well, they're still satisfied. No, something is wrong with the measurement. Take happiness and chuck it out of here. Next, he has a big section on love and connection, and I totally agree. But his definition of love is a very, very narrow, basically coming to the conclusion that we need to be in a long-term relationship. Do we all need relationships? And I would argue that we don't need one. We need connections. We need connections to the outside world, and we need connections to something bigger than ourselves and to feel like we're making a meaningful impact. General research says that someone's happiness is determined by their genetics by about 50%, and I'm arguing about 80 to 90% because of this. Here's the point with compounding. I believe that the set point then determines what happens with your conditions and voluntary activities. Just saying that it's at 50%, I think is useful for a lot of people, but I've met a lot of pessimists in my life, and it is seemingly nearly impossible for them to change, especially later in life. Sure, maybe if your set point is 50% when you're a child and you don't know the difference, maybe there's some influence there. But as you get older and as things start to cement and you have this idea of who you are, and then you have 20, 30, 40 years of compounding, I would say your set point matters way more than 50%. His whole thesis is happiness comes from within and without. That's his whole thing. I always say this and come back to it, is that you have to take 100% responsibility for your life. We have this one moment from like when a thing happens to our response. And in that moment, we get to decide how we respond. But I would say there's two steps. First, it's deciding what just happened. If someone throws this at my head, I have to decide what that means. Does that mean that they were trying to get my attention? Does that mean that they were trying to hurt me? Does that mean that it was a mistake? I have to decide what that means. Then I have to decide my response to that. And happiness is something similar. One, I think we should just get rid of happiness altogether. But if you're still set on chasing happiness, I think it's not so much a balance. Of course, you want to get the conditions right and you want to find meaningful work and you want to live in a nice place and have money, but ultimately, it comes from within you, all of it. It really is all determined by your internal state of being. Even if you believe your set point is at 50% or 80% or 90% or 40%, it doesn't matter. It's still up to you to decide what happiness means to you and if it's really something that you want to chase. As you know, I always like to leave you with actionable takeaways because as much as I like to visualize and think about me overcoming obstacles and just believe things are gonna happen, nothing changes without action. First one, like I said, everything comes from internally. So start meditating. If you hear this word and you're like cringe immediately, that's fine. I realize that so much of the content, it's gotten so weird. It's gotten too far out of hand. You don't need to pay a lot of money for an app. You don't need some special thing. You don't have to do it for 20 minutes or an hour. Meditation is just coming back to the present moment. I can meditate right now. There, I just meditated. That's it. Take a breath, ground yourself, and come back to it. Yes, of course, doing it in the morning or in the evening when your brain waves are at theta, then it'll be perfect. Just, if you can, sit outside without your phone for 5 or 10 minutes. Start there. If you can get up to it 15, 20 minutes, you don't have to do it like that every day. Just do what works for you. But yes, start meditating for the single reason of what I said before of in this moment when something happens to your response, there's this little moment, this gap right there, and meditation lets you see that gap and choose how you're going to respond. And that's worth, it's priceless. The next one, so simple, just make someone happy today. It could be so silly, like go pick a flower from outside and give it to somebody. The other day, I just got a piece of chocolate that I had when I was shopping at the store. I bought an extra thing of chocolate and I gave it to some of the ladies that work here. And they were just, it's just this little gift, this little thing, but it's worth so much. Just find a way to make one person happy. I've been saying lately, just go first, smile at someone, that counts. Okay, the next one, this one is super important. Work with your elephant. So I mentioned before that it works, or it only communicates through emotions. So you might be like, Scott, well, how do I do that? Do I just feel the emotion? Sure, that's one of them. You could sit in a chair and just visualize, yourself succeeding and people around you cheering for you and really feel that emotion. I'm not gonna lie, I've done it in the past. Did the life work out exactly as I had visualized? Yeah. You can visualize, you can change your narrative. Tell yourself a different story, like really catch yourself in a thing like, oh, I'm feeling bad today. Change that story. Make it an emotional story. And your environment. Now, I know the elephant only talks through emotions, and you're like, well, environment is physical. But make your environment feel good. Make it where it's a place where you want to go, where you want to do work, where you want to be around people. Personally, I'm living in Thailand right now. The environment changed everything. It was because of how the environment made me feel. The sunshine makes me feel so good. Waking up in the morning and you can see the blue sky and it's not freezing cold outside. And there's green grass and palm trees and smiling people and cheap food. The environment makes my elephant happy. Figure out what makes your elephant happy. That isn't cheap dopamine. And another thing with working with your elephant, if we think of things like exercise, you always see these things like you can put money out online. I think there's one like BeMinder or something. You can put money online and if you don't follow through, then your money disappears. Or you can make a deal with a friend and pay them money, like, whatever, $100. If you don't show up that day to do the work, then they get to keep the money. You can have an accountability partner to go to the gym with. Sure, these things work. I personally never use them, but maybe they do work. They're worth a try. Next thing you're going to do is find work you love. We live in a world where there's internet, and now there's a talking AI that does everything for you. Like, now I don't know what other excuses people could possibly come up with. Don't ever scroll anymore. Delete all the social media, all of it, gone. You'll have an hour to find something that you love to do. Start finding work you love. It's easier than ever today to just try things. And I'll end with the most important one. If you do anything at all out of this entire list and everything that we talked about today, just invest in your relationships. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, but friendships. Call that person back, send that message, try to meet somebody for a coffee this week. It doesn't have to be something big and grand and magnificent. Invest in your relationships, do the rest of these things, and you will find happiness. Here's the one final question to leave you with, and it's this. Is happiness what you're really searching for? Is it? And then we're going to, I don't like that, equals set point plus. What we are is a creation of our excellence and virtue. Because that's, just realized he was losing an eyeball. They wrote for 15 minutes for, yeah, we'll leave it.